Our first president in 1916 was Dr. Mary Glowry, a young medical doctor here in Melbourne, and she later, of course, went to India to work and serve the people there. I think learning something about the history of the League, and obviously perhaps we've been put in a situation because it is now, as you say, 100 years. And just 100 years ago, on October the 1st in fact, Father William Lockington, SJ, addressed about 2,000 women in Cathedral Hall, urging them to realise that Catholic values, Christian principles needed to be reflected in legislation. And from there, the Catholic Women's Social Guild, as it was first known, started. I think too Archbishop Carr in 1916 was also a great supporter, one who also encouraged that the League ladies or the Catholic Women's Social Guild ladies do the work that really had to be done. We know it was First World War, women had been thrown into situations that otherwise they would never have experienced. Things had changed, situations had changed, so the women needed to be able to be a force to deal with those changed situations, and they did. They set forth, and well, we hope that here we are 100 years later, we're still fighting the challenges, facing the challenges and dealing with them as best we can. Certainly times have changed, and even in my time in the League over the last very few years, for example, communication has changed so dramatically. I can't even really put into words how the League might change in the years to come. Change it will, but to stay, remain, I trust that it will, because it's needed. It's so needed in our secular society. We're faced with...
I've really enjoyed looking back through the old horizons and reading. I haven't read all of them, but I've certainly read quite a lot of them. I find it just fascinating, the things that they've had to deal with at that time. When the League was first set up, they were very much into practical support. The biggest thing for them was the fact that girls were coming into the city to work in place of the men because it happened during the war. And those girls didn't have accommodation. So the League members felt at that time that they were in really quite a dangerous situation. So one of the first things they did was to set up a big hostel. So it's interesting to see that they were really strongly into practical work. They're setting up the hostel, knitting for children who were cold and orphaned, and that they set up Santa Casa, which is the place down at Queenscliff, for sickly children to be able to go and have a holiday near the beach. So it's interesting to see that those are the things that they were keen on in those days. The thing that's really struck me, though, is the issues that we talk about today. Many of them had their origin at that time. So I find that really quite fascinating. Well, originally it was called the Catholic Social Worker, and that name lasted until 1924, when they had a competition to choose the name. The current name is The Horizon, and that name was chosen at that time. They felt that it was a good way of sort of demonstrating the connection between God and man. The horizon, the sky, was God met in the, at a line where man's work was honoured as well, and also God's. I don't know that I could say that I've got a favourite edition, but to see the changes that have occurred in it over the years and to see the things that the women have tackled over the years is really quite fascinating. And I guess the first one, the very first issue, is special because of the fact that it was the very, very first one. And the Catholic Women's League of Victoria and Wagga joined with several other Catholic Women's League organisations in the other states, and they decided to come together and have an umbrella organisation called the Catholic Women's League of Australia. So in 1970 they joined together. In 1975, Catholic Women's League of Victoria and Wagga Wagga changed its name. The Catholic Women's League of Australia has got affiliation with the World Union of Catholic Women's Organisations, which is centred in Rome. That organisation has got Public International Association of the Faithful status with the Vatican. It has also got status with ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Committee of the United Nations. But Catholic Women's League of Australia has also got NGO status with ECOSOC. So that means that we're entitled to send a representative to United Nations committees, consultations. So each year, a member of the Catholic Women's League of Australia is sent to the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. It's held in March. The weather's usually pretty terrible. Snow on the ground, very cold. As a NGO, we are able to run a side event, if we like. At the United Nations, when they have these commissions on the status of women, government organisations will run side events, which are held in the United Nations land, I think it's 8 hectares of land. The NGOs are able to run parallel events, which are held outside of the United Nations area. We have managed to run non-government organisation sessions ourselves. Going along to the United Nations is really very interesting. You get to see what's happening and what's being pushed at the moment in the United Nations. The Catholic Women's League has for many years now sent a representative to the United Nations. There's been quite a string of people that have had that job over the years, and I just happen to have had it for the last 5 years.
I was very fortunate. I knew people who, in the Catholic Women's League really, who have this wonderful treasure. The League owns a collection of Mary Glary letters, and I had the privilege of reading them and becoming sort of very inspired, obviously, by the heroism of this woman. She's only the second Australian to have been on the official path to canonisation because of the work that she did in India, but not just because of that, because of her extraordinary faith as well, obviously. And she also had a very wise and witty literary Australian style, and that comes out in her letters. So hopefully that will be able to be shared with more people through this museum. Well, she was a shy and timid person, a very humble person, but she just, her motto in life was always just to do whatever the will of God was. And in a world where there's sort of so many perhaps pessimistic things going on, my personal hope is that she will be able to show particularly young people what a difference one person can make. Well, perhaps she's not been known well enough, and but perhaps in this great year of the centenary of the League, it's sort of very, very providential that plans are made for this museum to be set up so that people can learn more about the first president of the League. The Mary Glary Museum, we hope, will be open in May next year, which is the very month of Mary Glary's 60th anniversary. It will be located on the second floor of the boot factory, which is adjacent to Cathedral Hall in Brunswick Street, Fitzroy. It's part of ACU's Melbourne campus, and ACU has very generously agreed to allow the space to be used as a museum and to refurbish it. And it's a terrific spot because it's the very rooms that Mary Glary and the original committee of the Catholic Women's Social Guild, now the League of course, would have worked in. Archbishop Carr gave them those rooms to work in. So that's where the museum will be situated, and it will have facsimiles, copies of some of the very beautiful and inspirational letters that Mary wrote home to her family about the extraordinary work that she did in India. There are 4 stages, I believe, in the steps towards canonisation, and I think Mary Glary's cause was only started in 2010, and in 2013 she was declared a servant of God. So that's the first of the 4 steps, and then after that, if that goes well, then you become venerable, and then blessed, and then canonised.